I've been a big fan of Death Battle for a very long time now. Being a fan of this show led to me meeting most of my friends and creating my own versus show heavily influenced by it. So, like most people who watch the show, I have a few ideas I'd like to see eventually happen on Death Battle. They've done so many episodes already, and yet there are still hundreds of ideas out there that haven't been touched. I've got my 10 most wanted episodes prepared, and now I'm going to explain why I want them. So let's just dive in. Ash Williams vs. Herbert West. Alright, I'm starting off the list with the match I think is the least likely to ever happen. Mostly because I think Reanimator is too obscure for anyone on the Death Battle team to be aware of. But hey, it's my list, and I think this match works. Both Ash and Herbert have connections to H.P. Lovecraft, with Herbert outright being a character from Lovecraft, and Ash being stuck with the Necronomicon, which originated from H.P. Lovecraft. The two are forced to fight undead monsters, who were only summoned in the first place due to their careless actions, and so the two have to fight through similarly splatstick-style horror trilogies. The two also ended up getting comics that further displayed their knack for survival. Me comparing them to each other isn't unfounded either. The comics eventually paired the two together in Army of Darkness vs. Reanimator and Army of Darkness / Reanimator, and they ended up fighting both times. So, I'm not the only one seeing the connection here. First of all, I think they'd both have pretty fun chemistry together. Herbert's no-nonsense personality would play off well against Ash's careless and rude personality. I like this as a brains versus brawn matchup. We don't see a lot of those. I could see Herbert sicking a group of reanimated zombies at Ash, only for Ash to mow through them with his chainsaw and boomstick. Maybe the fight can start over the Necronomicon, since Herbert would think Ash is too stupid to be the owner of it, while Ash doesn't trust Herbert with it due to his unhinged nature. You're probably wondering why I chose this out of all the Ash fights, though. Well, I honestly just don't know any other match of Ash Williams that interests me. Frank West and Leon were already covered pretty thoroughly on the show, and those are Ash's biggest matches. Other than that, I've heard Doomguy and Guts as opponents, but those don't seem like fair matches at all. You might then be thinking that this match is a stomp too, so who cares? But I don't think it is. Herbert is actually pretty formidable when you include the comics. We've actually seen Herbert throw down like Ash, and even make note of his physical strength. We also figure out that his magical blood constantly restores him from death, so actually killing Herbert would prove to be really difficult. However, I do ultimately believe Ash comes out on top. He still does fight more often, and has the deadlier arsenal. His arsenal even comes with a direct counter to Herbert's blood thing. In one of the games, he has a weapon that sucks the blood out of his enemy, which Ash then uses as ammo. That's pretty much exactly what he needs to get rid of Herbert's immortality, and I think that's kinda cool. I don't know, man, this is never gonna happen. I just really want Ash on Death Battle on the basis that he's one of my favorite characters. Herbert is one of my favorite characters too, so seeing him on the show would be bizarre. And I think Herbert pairs well with Ash in this case, so sure, Ash vs. Herbert. The Disney Princess Battle Royale. This is an episode that was talked about long ago on the Death Battle cast, and it's stuck with me ever since. As a huge fan of Disney, the idea of all of these characters coming together and, I guess killing each other, sounds kind of fun. I especially like the idea that they'd be giving the princesses weird shit, like giving Cinderella's a magic wand and giving Ariel's a trident, since that's what they decided to allow in the cast anyways. That could make this a pretty grand battle, at least between a few of the princesses. I did want to narrow down the roster a bit so it could realistically happen on the show, and I think I've got a good selection here. Cinderella for the magic wand, Ariel for the trident, Mulan for her fighting experience, Rapunzel for the TV show stuff, Elsa because of her great ice powers, and Moana for having control of the water. The other Disney princesses would be fodder in my opinion, so you just need to bring it down to these 6. I like a lot of the ideas they pitched in the cast episode, like having a big musical number in there. A Death Battle episode that's a fucking musical sounds amazing. Just in general, I would love to see that. I've always liked scenes where characters sing as they fight, and if that's gonna fit for any death battle, it's this one. Really, it was between this and the Cereal Mascots Battle Royale for this list, but that eventually got its own tournament arc on Death Battle Cast, whereas the Disney Princesses have gone starving. So I nominate them for the actual episode. If I were to give my quick prediction for a winner, I'm actually not too sure about it. I guess if Ariel has the trident, she can forcefully control the sea, muting Moana's powers, and she can probably become a giant like Ursula at that point. I'll just place my bets on Ariel for now. You don't want to fuck with her. Jason Voorhees vs. Michael Myers. I've always thought Death Battle was lacking in its usage of movie characters. In their early seasons we got stuff like RoboCop vs. the Terminator and Godzilla vs. Gamera, but nowadays the only movie characters we see are Star Wars characters. Fair enough, but I want more movies, and I specifically want horror movies. Despite running for so long, there hasn't been a single true horror movie character on Death Battle yet. Terminator and Godzilla eventually became action franchises, so those don't count. As a huge fan of horror, I've actually got a couple of matches I want to see. I mean, I started the list with one. But the most obvious match is Jason Voorhees vs. Michael Myers. This has just honestly been a long time coming. Everyone always talks about this match, and horror fans have wanted to see it for years. Two of the most iconic silent slashers in cinema, with a ridiculous amount of sequels and a high body count. It'd be interesting to see who can take out the other. There may not seem like a lot of potential for combat at the start, but I could see someone getting really creative with it. Have Jason bash Michael's head into a tree, creating a smiley face. Let Michael have a scene where it's his POV coming after Jason. Hey, maybe later in the fight, Michael gets his eye stabbed into, and he has to start swatting around like in Halloween 2. That's a pretty iconic image. I know Death Battle Cast recently did Freddy Krueger vs. Jason, and Chad even expressed interest in doing that as a full episode. I wouldn't say no to seeing either of those icons on the show, of course, but I really think Jason vs. Michael is such a legacy match that they have to do it. Besides, I think Freddy Krueger has better opponents anyways. As for who probably wins Jason vs. Michael, yeah, I think we all know Jason takes it. Wackier displays of strength because he's in a wackier franchise. Like, Friday the 13th actually wants to be silly, whereas the Halloween franchise is unintentionally silly. Evil dies tonight! But that doesn't make the match any less fun. I really think it has to happen at some point. Or at least, I hope it'll happen. The Doctor vs. Rick Sanchez. Here's a match that would be legendary to witness. The Doctor and Rick Sanchez are pretty similar in that they're both incredibly intelligent yet arrogant people who travel the universe and go on adventures, usually with a partner attached. They have amazing technology too, which I think would clash well together. The battle of wits here is what really intrigues me. Seeing these two go at it, constantly trying to gain the upper hand and outwit the other sounds great. With their technology, they could keep each other on their toes, and I could see it being really cool when one of them finally outsmarts the other. Death Battle has started to use more cartoon characters, and I think Rick has enough on him to be combat applicable. He'd certainly be really entertaining to have on the show. It'd be hilarious to see his crude and vulgar personality play off the Doctor. Rick would absolutely be hitting below the belt whenever he gets the chance, maybe even to the point of using his ship to create a melting version of one of the Doctor's companions. I've heard people request Bender for Rick, but I don't think the connections there are as strong as Rick's connections to the Doctor. And the contrast in personalities isn't as amusing as it is here. Bender would play along with Rick's attempts to embarrass him, but the Doctor would just be so sick of Rick's shit. I'm not sure which incarnation of the Doctor they'd go with here. I'm pretty sure the 10th and 11th Doctors are the best picks. I've personally got a bias towards the 10th with David Tennant, but I'd be okay with either showing up. Maybe towards the end of the battle we can see all of the Doctors at once coming to defeat Rick. Speaking of, when it comes to an eventual winner, I'm pretty sure the Doctor would take it. Not only does he have more experience due to living multiple lifetimes, but I'm pretty sure his sonic screwdriver outright turns off technology. So most of Rick's weapons are instantly countered by the Doctor's most iconic one. Plus, I just think he's more rational and level-headed than Rick, and has done more impressive cosmic shit. I'm sure there's some horrific I have no mouth and I must scream fate that the Doctor could unload onto Rick if he wanted. Gru vs. Megamind. Ever since I got into Death Battle, I'd heard about this match. When I was getting into Death Battle, these were fairly recent movies, and I enjoyed both Despicable Me and Megamind, so I was really hoping to see it one day. But eventually I forgot about the match for a while, and I'm only recently remembering why I wanted it pretty bad. Seeing Megamind in particular be analyzed and portrayed on Death Battle sounds like great fun. As a kid, Megamind was actually my favorite animated movie for a time, and I still think it's amazing. Despicable Me, not so much. The first one's fine, but the sequels really go downhill. Still, I think Gru is an entertaining character regardless, and seeing him clash with Megamind's ego would be great. There's a lot of potential for the fight with their weapons and such. It'd be cool to see Gru use his airship to combat Megamind in his mech suit. The two could shoot various lasers at each other while Megamind tries to engage in some witty back and forth banter. Gru can whip out a gun with the full intent of blasting Megamind's face off only to realize that it's a water gun. That fucking movie. Oh, Gru's minions could fight Megamind's brainbots and Minion. Actually, seeing Minion be a part of all of this would be great. He was a really endearing character. I think it'd also be cool if at the start of the fight they're both acting as villains, sort of presuming the fight takes place before the redemptions, but when one of them is on the brink of death, we see their humanity kick in as they try to save the other, but ultimately they fail. Who do I think would be on the dying end of that interaction? Probably Gru. That is to say, I think Megamind takes this one. His minions are far more competent, his dehydration gun is more multifaceted and useful than the freeze ray, and Megamind shockingly has his own freeze ray in the comics. Yes, those happened. But more importantly, I think the difference in power is clear when you see that Gru is essentially a Bond villain parody, while Megamind is more of a superhero villain parody. It is thus up against way tougher threats, and is still able to put up a fight. I can't see Gru toppling one of Megamind's mechs. Still, I think this match has a lot of potential, and I think it's about time we actually see it on the show. Peter Griffin vs. Homer Simpson. Another iconic pairing. Peter and Homer have been hashing this one out for a while now, with jabs at each other in both shows, and eventually the two fighting it out in a crossover. But much like RoboCop vs. the Terminator and their crossovers, I want to see who would actually win with research. This is stranger than that, because we're dealing with two cartoon dads who are nearly indestructible and have a tendency to create chaos and violence wherever they go. I think this battle would get a lot of traction. The Simpsons and Family Guy are still in the public knowledge, because both shows are still going on, and people are having a fun time goofing on how bad they've gotten, while also reminiscing on how good they once were. Having Peter and Homer go at it again could lend itself to a lot of fun meta jokes. Homer needs to pull off his iconic scream, and I desperately want to see Peter use a cutaway gag. Like, have him just make any 80s pop culture reference you want and animate it all the same. It shouldn't even be related to the fight at hand. Family Guy cutaway gags rarely ever connect to the plot. There's just a lot of potential for fun here. Though, I guess the amount of fun one could have with the match depends on how much of either show you grew up with. Then again, I think most people would get a kick out of seeing Peter and Homer on Death Battle regardless. If I were to give my quick opinions on who wins it, most people would say Homer, but I've always thought Peter would win. Mostly because I think Family Guy is a crazier show. The Simpsons is more grounded with a plot, whereas Family Guy is more interested in giving you bizarre cutaway gags that lead to Peter duplicating himself, becoming a Wonder Twin, and all sorts of shit like that. The Simpsons usually reserves their crazy stuff for the non-canon Treehouse of Horror specials, whereas you'd find Family Guy doing stuff like time travel on a normal episode. Peter could have his otherworldly, shadowy spirit friends drag Homer into oblivion. See, that's sort of what I mean. Peter can just do weird shit like that. But what do I know? I mostly grew up on Family Guy, so I'm biased. I could see the battle going either way, and I think most people would have a hard time predicting the outcome. Having this become one of the more debatable matches on the show would be freaky sweet. Finn and Jake vs Mordecai and Rigby. Another iconic cartoon matchup here. As you can tell, I want a lot more cartoons on the show. Steven vs Star was a step in the right direction, and I think the next biggest cartoon match is this one. Adventure Time and Regular Show took Cartoon Network by storm when they came out, and they're still pretty popular shows despite having ended a while ago. Despite that, I think the two pairs at hand here are pretty different from each other, and I actually like the contrast. Finn and Jake get along with their brotherly bond, while Mordecai and Rigby constantly bicker with each other. Yet, both sides have bizarre, sometimes cosmic weapons and abilities that make them shockingly formidable in battle. In the fight, I think it'd be funny to have Mordecai and Rigby spawn everything they can think of with the power, only for Finn and Jake to get their hands on it and actually try to make coherent music with it, until the entire landscape is just filled with both teams' imaginations running wild. As for who might win, I hear that they're both actually pretty comparable in stats, to the point that this comes down mostly to weapons and abilities. My gut has always told me that Finn and Jake should win this. They're generally better at actually fighting and working as a team. They also have strange abilities like magic and Jake's imagination, which could counter the power. Jake can weirdly warp reality just like the power, but he doesn't need to sing a song about it beforehand. I think Finn and Jake can do it, but I'm only like 60% sure. Chucky vs Slappy. Another horror match on this list. Chucky and Slappy are both pretty similar in that they like to play dead and make kids look crazy as they antagonize them in secret. Difference being, Chucky is from a R-rated horror series, and Slappy comes from the more PG horror of Goosebumps. Immediately, I like that contrast between violent horror and tame horror. I can only imagine Slappy having a shocked reaction upon hearing Chucky blurt out a stream of obscenities at him. Both dolls have strange magical powers and are shown to be practically unkillable at a certain point. I think with their powers you could get pretty creative with the fight, and Chucky's dangerous arsenal of knives, grenades, and pistols would further spread chaos. It'd be great to see Chucky's clone army fight off Slappy's monsters, or maybe Slappy's own army of dummies. As the fight draws to a close, it'd be really cool to see Chucky perform one of his iconic voodoo chants. Whether it gets pulled off successfully or not would depend on who wins. Honestly, the only tricky thing here would be figuring out what to show for most of Slappy's feats, since a lot of the good stuff happens in the books with no real visual aid. But I'm sure stock footage will suffice. As for who wins, I'm honestly not sure. I've gone back and forth on this particular match for years now. I've done the match on some of my older Versus content and the verdict kept changing. But for now, I think Slappy takes it, mostly because the books give him a lot of weird hacks. But I'm not sure. Chucky does have a few win cons. I'd certainly root for Chucky anyways. Mickey Mouse vs Bugs Bunny. This match has been a long time coming. Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny are the biggest faces in animation, and I've been dying to see them get discussed on Death Battle. Mickey actually kind of did get discussed before, but that was when they were specifically using King Mickey from Kingdom Hearts. And hey, they made a great episode of him there. A common theme with the matches I've chosen is that the two combatants will contrast in a few ways, and that's no different here. Seeing Bugs Bunny's more sly and somewhat cruel personality play off Mickey's innocent and more trusting personality would be great. The two have so many powers and abilities that the battle could get incredibly creative as it goes on. There's almost no limit to what they can do. A Keyblade versus lightsaber duel could take place. Mickey could don the sorcerer hat and flood the arena, and Bugs can leave the fourth wall to mess with Mickey there. It'd actually be pretty fun if the battle drags them both out into the real world, since both have shown the ability to escape the animation in the past. Although, hopefully, it doesn't end up becoming awkward like with Deadpool vs Pinkie Pie. Oh, I guess I should say, just keep Deadpool out of it if this episode ends up happening. I also like the idea of Donald Duck vs Daffy Duck, but when it comes to which one I want to see the most right now, well, we already got that DBX for Donald and Daffy, so the Mickey vs Bugs match is the one I'm hankering to see the most right now. As for who wins, it's always been a very tricky one for me. But I've always ended up siding with Mickey. I just generally think his competence prevents him from falling for Bugs' shenanigans, and I think Kingdom Hearts gives him better stats than Bugs. But the stats have always been debatable, and I think there's a long discussion to be had about this match. Bugs does have a very strong debate on his side, but for me, personally, I'm siding with the mouse. Freddy Krueger vs. Pennywise. That's right, my #1 most wanted death battle is Freddy Krueger from A Nightmare on Elm Street versus Pennywise from Stephen King's It. Both of them are the embodiment of horror, using their mind-reading and shape-shifting abilities to literally become your worst nightmare. The two take sick delight in wreaking havoc, but can be overcome through willpower and true courage. I've wanted to see this match for a long time now, and what I think really sells me on it as a death battle is the amazing fight potential. They both have a lot of the same, almost limitless powers, basically able to come up with anything they want due to their reality warping. It'd be really cool to see Pennywise shapeshift into characters that have defeated Freddy, like Nancy and Ash Williams, while Freddy tries to take the form of the Losers Club. Seeing the two try their best to draw fear out of the other sounds amazing. And it'd be all the more satisfying when one of them finally succeeds and the losers left a whimpering mess. I really think a fight between these two could reach a grand scale, with the battle escalating to cosmic proportions. It also makes sense why the fight would take place in the dream world, because Pennywise tends to sleep for 27 years straight. I also just think Freddy and Pennywise can play off each other really well. They're both very eccentric, with Freddy constantly making cheesy puns, and Pennywise often giggling to himself. It'd actually be really interesting if they start off as their more exaggerated selves, but as the battle drags on and they really try to drive the fear out, Freddy starts to resemble his more serious self from the original film in New Nightmare, and Pennywise drops his cheerful facade and starts growling, and probably giving a grand villain speech towards the end like in It Chapter 2. Both have other opponents, but I think this match has better connections than the others. I already mentioned why I don't want Jason for Freddy, but I also wouldn't want Freddy vs. Pinhead. I would actually be okay if Pinhead is what they went with, but I can't say I prefer it. I don't even fully understand their connections. Is it just that they both have powers and come from the 80s? Is there some religious connection there? I don't know. It seems less thematic than Pennywise. I like the idea of Freddy Krueger vs. Beetlejuice, which actually has enough connections to where I think it rivals Pennywise as a match for Fred, but this isn't really a popular match, so I don't see it happening. Same deal with the tall man from Phantasm. There just isn't a lot of demand for those matches, as much as I like them. And even then, I'd still say I prefer Pennywise as a match in the long run. Also, dear God, do not make Freddy fight Scarecrow and Pennywise fight Sinestro. I don't want that. That's the nightmare I would have if Freddy were after me. He's just tormenting me with it. I also want Freddy to be funny in the actual fight. Don't play him too straight or else it'll be way too much like the remake. Let him make a pun or two. Bad year, Dan! Okay, so who wins? If you remember, I did this fight on Multiverse Match and had Pennywise win, and that's because I included its true form. And I still think that's the key. If you include his true form, Pennywise should win because the true form is beyond just universal. But if you don't include it, I would actually side with Freddy. Assuming the fight is in the dream world, he would be universal, or at the very least star level, which beats out Pennywise's large mountain stuff as a meteor. So it really just comes down to what you want to use. I'm still saying Pennywise takes it in my book, but you won't see me crying if Freddy wins. Well, that was my list. It was mostly filled with movies and cartoons, but I think that's exactly what Death Battle is lacking at the moment, so I think it's fair enough. If any of these matches happened, I would pop off pretty hard, so here's hoping. That's all I've got, so goodbye for now.